have, sorry about that. Sometimes there's there's language barriers or different things like that, or they're working, or they don't see something in the mail or something like that. Was a common theme we were hearing. So it's such a blessing to have this as a resource, and Meadows does a wonderful job putting this together. And so when OSHA was able to come and kind of share what these employers should be doing, it'll kind of hopefully it empowers those farmers to know what they should be expecting when they, the farmers and the farm workers, what they should be expecting. Marion County Health Department has came on twice now, and they've talked once about just basic health information when this all started. And this past week, they spoke about what it's like to have a contact tracer contact you. And I feel that's extremely important, especially in a community where a phone call from a government agency could be very nerve-wracking. And so they were able to share information of what questions are asked, and just to hopefully make the community more comfortable moving forward when they do receive that call from a contact tracer, that they answer it, because that is a key factor for us to continue to slow down this spread as well as move into future phases. And then Salute Medical, from a medical perspective, to have a doctor on the call to really share that information. And then I'll send it back over to Irene to speak about the Russian radio program and give a little insight into that piece that she put together.
Yeah, so I have a close working relationship with the Russian radio. It reaches, I mean, that 1 hour that we were on the Russian radio with Dr. Cislak and Tamara to translate, and people were calling in, and this was a call-in radio show. And we heard some very original, information or questions that I've not heard anywhere else. It was a great platform for the Russian-speaking community to call in and ask Dr. Paul Cislak of the Oregon Health Authority specific questions about COVID. And the reason that I jumped on it was because it was so urgent. And I know that in the Woodburn area, you have the Russian Overlever community, you have the newly immigrated Russian-speaking community, you have Romanian, Ukrainian, several generations of Russian speakers in the Woodburn area, and that the older generation, specifically with the Russian Old Believer and those that have immigrated recently, they're tuned into the Russian radio. And so I used my outreach strategies to let people know in the Russian community that we were going to be on the radio. And the moment that we got off the radio, they're just on the platform that we were on, which is online, 2,500 people had engaged in that radio show. And so I felt like that was the fastest way. We did this really quickly. Within a few days, I worked with my extended networks from between the city of Portland and beyond to try to get this radio show coordinated. And it was a great way to just very quickly get information, dispel a bunch of different myths and conspiracy theories that were floating around, because they were able to ask the doctor directly and get that answer in real time. And again, Dr. Cislak's approach and the Oregon Health Authority's willingness to spend that kind of time in such a quick turnaround of a few days was truly magnificent. And it was, again, an honor to host that radio show.
Thank you. And to our point about Dr. Cislak, when he came and spoke at the Russian Old Believer leadership meeting, he's absolutely fantastic. He created a very calm sense in the room, not a sense of over-education where he was talking in ways that maybe would be over everyone's heads, because we know all doctors are able of doing that. And it really made it down to earth. And I really appreciate Irene for helping us make that contact. It's been really invaluable.
And if I may, the Russian radio is the fastest and most effective way to reach the Russian community. And I know that along with everyone else, they're struggling for funding. It's $300 for the hour for something this urgent. They said, okay, fine, we will not charge you. And they'll continue to do that. But I know that over time, as this crisis continues, if we happen to lose that platform, that would be very unfortunate, because then we would not have instant access to the masses in the radio that we do now.
Thank you, Irene. Appreciate that. Some continued outreach that we're doing in addition to the ones that were stated above. We're working on different community forums. So we're working on this one is again out to the general public. We recently ran an ads on Facebook as well as our e-blast to receive questions from our community. And so we just actually consolidated to those today. And then we will be having Marion County Health as well as a doctor from Salud Medical on, and we're going to be doing in Woodburn Police to answer a series of about 15 questions. We'll be recording that message and editing. Tommy will be doing some fantastic editing, and we'll be having that in English and Spanish and English and Russian. Irene is going to help again facilitate that, as well as Marcela with the Spanish version. So again, this is to give another platform to share education and other materials. So just any way we could canvas the community we were looking for. The third arm of this was doing our business outreach. And so through our economic development partners, as well as the chamber and other avenues, I want to give a lot of credit where credit is due with Amanda and Jamie and their hard work in economic development. Amanda puts together a weekly newsletter, which is absolutely fantastic to our businesses, that goes out to about 300 businesses weekly, provides information on updated sector guidance and several other factors that might be coming along. We also provided those free business posters for any businesses who wanted to pick them up to place around their facility to provide education for the public. And we also noticed that we became a central hub, and not only just through the emails, but from the community at large. The community a sense of someone that they could tie into, whether it was someone from our faith-based organizations, a business. It gave them someone they could contact, and we as the city may not know the exact answer, but through these networks that we've built and cultivated, we were able to find answers for folks. And I think it really helped streamline the process and streamline a lot of the stress. We were able to respond to most folks easily within 24 hours. And it just gave them confidence that when they were in need or they were anxious about something, they were able to get support. In addition to those 300 businesses that get emailed weekly letters, there's about 100 or so that Amanda is in phone contact with on almost a weekly basis. And she contacts them directly just to check on them and see how they're doing. And if there's any questions, again, we wanted to come alongside. We wanted to provide education, but we wanted to let them know that we're alongside you with this. And we might not be able to help in every way possible, but we want to get you in contact with who can help you. So if that was getting you in contact with someone within the banking community, so you could do your PPP, whether it was PPE and finding resources through the chamber and what they were donated by Marion County or other avenues, we wanted to work on that. And then the farm labor contractors. So we also looked into reaching out to the farming community, but after having conversations with Marion County Health as well as the Marion County Farm Bureau, they felt like their outreach to the farmers themselves has been pretty extensive. But when Marcela was speaking with them and asked, what about our labor contractors? They basically said that is a large gap and it's been missing. And so we took, this team took that information, Marcela specifically, and now Irene's going to be supporting in some outreach as well, and calling these labor contractors. We've currently called 27 different labor contractors within the area to make sure they're aware of the new temporary rules that are in place, as well as just provide that arm of support again, whether it's finding PPE or other items like that. So we're continuing to do that outreach, and again, just trying to lend a hand out there because it is a very uncertain time. And lastly, we're working on, this will be happening next week, but with all the phases, and I can't tell you how layered and dense the information is getting at this point, but with all the different phases and sector guidances that are being changed on a daily basis, we wanted to be able to provide a forum in which these businesses could receive that information. And so starting next week, we're doing two different sector guidance business community forums in which we'll have representatives from Marion County, the Chamber, and our economic development team to answer questions about the sector guidance and provide guidance on how they should do that, whether that's going to be we'll have a specific one for personal services, which are your hairstylists, any of those kind of direct hands-on, as well as we'll have one for restaurants and bars. And we'll look on continuing to build those as needed moving forward, just so they have access to answers. And those will be in English and Spanish. So I'm really excited to put those together starting next week. We kind of have those all lined out, and we're moving forward on that soon. So I'm also going to show an amazing video that was put together by Economic Development Tommy. Many of you may have seen it, but if people are watching, they might not have seen this yet. This has 21,000 views, 20.9, something like that, 21,000 views. I'm going to show this. Hopefully it's not too loud.
Is there sound and I'm just missing it?
No.
Okay.
So I'm sorry, was there sound difficulties there, Councilor Morris?
Was there sound with it? I couldn't hear the sound. Yeah. I can look at it separately.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, I'm not that into GoToMeeting, I guess. I apologize about that. But yeah, so there is a beautiful song with it too. So definitely catch that. And then lastly, kind of as Woodburn does, we looked at the situation, and the common theme was how do we slow the spread of COVID-19 within our community. And the common theme we were hearing from all our health professionals was, something that is easy and tangible for folks to do was facial coverings. So I worked with Jamie Junker, I'm Economic Development Director, and had this dream idea of let's reach out to Fjord or a local business we have in town that does a lot of sewing for Nike and other agencies, and see what we can do in partnership with them to provide a large quantity of facial coverings. And I've came to the knowledge of there's a big difference between facial coverings and masks over this time as well. But our goal was between 30 and 50,000 units to be able to provide to our community. And so through reallocating some grant funds that we had, as well as $18,000 in community contributions, we just placed an order for 24,388 facial coverings. These are a 2-ply polyester facial covering with a metal nose piece that'll be bendable to kind of form to your face a little better. And we should be receiving these within the next week or so. We've been reaching out to community partners so we can kind of see what their need is and what they could use within their communities. And so you can see the list below with Bakun, Farm Worker Housing Development Corporation, Senior States, Senior Care Facilities, Woodburn Ambulance, Fire, Police, Woodburn School District, the different faith community churches, Love Inc., etc., North Marion School District. And so we kind of have a list of 35 different community partners we've reached out to, and once we receive those, we'll create kits. These kits will come with the number of masks that they inquired about, or at least what we can do. And then we'll also be providing education materials alongside of this on how to take care of your mask and how masks don't replace social distancing, and how it's just a step in kind of slowing the process and how to keep care of that mask, and so you can continue to do it. Our goal with this was, there was agencies, there's amazing volunteers within our community that have produced thousands of masks between volunteers. I think there's one church that's for two ladies that provided close to 2,000 masks on their own. And so we wanted to provide, again, reusable masks. These are reusable, they're not disposables. We wanted something that someone could continue to reuse. It's great to have a one-time use, but if you could have something to even put over a disposable, we felt we were putting our community in a position to stay healthier and keep everyone around them healthy. So with that.
Well, Jesse, thanks. I'm just gonna add a couple more things here. One of the probably one of the most asked questions we receive at the city is about enforcement of social distancing and mask wearing. Mm-hmm. And in terms of individual behavior, we really are encouraging people to try to follow the rules and to wear face coverings when appropriate. But it's really beyond anybody's ability to actually force people to wear face coverings when you see them out on the street or in the parks. We're hoping that with good information and with access to masks, people will see their responsibility to do so. And then the other question here too is sort of, what did we do and when did we know? And one of the things I'm really encouraging happen at some point is that Marion County undertake an after-action report about the COVID-19 crisis, or how it unfolded, how the communication lines were established with partners and local jurisdictions, how did that evolve over time, and what lessons can really be learned. I was on a call the other day, and it occurred to me that this is probably my third or fourth bona fide emergency crisis that I've been involved in. And every one thing that happens consistent is communication suffers, and it happens when it's a single event, and it happens when it unfolds over time. And so, the idea is that we want to be better if there's a recurrence of COVID in the fall or ever again, or any other kind of pandemic or crisis that involves Marion County. I think a look back about what worked well and how can we improve for the better is going to be a really important question to ask at some point in time. And so, I think it's a concept that people have started talking about. I know in the last week or 10 days, I've been really trying hard to touch bases with our check-in with people. Being isolated at home, I'm missing talking to people, but to check in, and I think this is this is an important thing that people want to talk about. What have we learned from all of this exercise, and how can we be better in the future? And I hope that can happen at some point. It have to happen at the county level. So Jesse, good job. Irene, thank you for everything. And are there any questions about the city's communication and outreach or COVID or anything at all while the team is here?
I have a quick question. How did the conversation go when y'all contacted the farm labor contractors?
So initially there was actually some like, the city's calling us, what's going on? But once Monticello was just saying, oh no, we just want to make sure that you've received the updated information, that that we want to be a resource for you. And if you have questions that we can't answer, here's a contact directly to OSHA who can answer these questions for you, as well as, hey, we want to provide you, provide you information about there's additional PPE available. And so I think initially there was some maybe fear or hesitation, but I think it was much appreciated after that first barrier was broken down. And hopefully it builds for the future and just saying, hey, if you have questions, reach out.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Other questions?
I have a question. I wanted to ask Irene, what is the station ID for the Russian radio station?
It's 1010.
1010.
Yeah.
10:10 a.m. Okay, thank you.
I can't see everybody on the screen. Mr. Morris, questions?
No
Councilor Crane?
questions here.
Lisa? I would like to take a moment to emphasize some of the points that were made, because this has been, as Scott mentioned, like a tremendous thing that we've all gone through, and so just want to throw out some kudos, if I could take a few minutes to do that. One, I think, to Irene, the Robes group had come, just a few of them, to the mayor's office more than a year ago and wanted to be more involved, and then they turned out 50 plus people at the cleanup. But I want to say that even the leaders in that small group could not have imagined us bringing together all the other people. They were like, I don't even know if they'll take your call, Mayor. We're just out there. So, and it brings to mind probably my most painful day in this was when we had a morning phone call with Marion County, and as I'd mentioned before, even in these meetings, the clinic directors we'd been in contact with had not sounded the alarm and thought our numbers were pretty good. And so that meeting, when the county called and wagged a little finger, was a difficult. But that evening, I was able to call the 9 of those 10 Russian leaders, and understanding the importance of that. And so it was fulfilling to come to here and see them all in the room that most predicted didn't happen. So thanks, Irene, for that. I think to Jesse and the team specifically, and I've said this in some other forums, but I want to say it in this forum to Jesse and those on the team, that after a month after this started, and attending, and kind of starting the meeting with Teresa, the community leaders meeting and the chamber meetings and Latinx meetings, visiting all the faith leaders and videotaping them and getting them in a meeting, and the nonprofits, the video messaging with Tommy, the Woodburn Proud activities, in touch with all the medical directors all the time, rebutting and answering the press over and over again about the language that they were using. I really appreciated when Jesse and the team started. I really felt at that point I didn't have to know everything and be in every meeting, and it was a relief to know that and kudos to Scott. Scott's recognized as one of the more brilliant city managers in our state, and part of that brilliance is choosing the right people and the right teams to get things done, and it was like the cavalry. So. To Jamie and Amanda, during those weeks, I stopped in with all the business owners, most of the small business owners, sometimes with John, and you could tell they were relieved by just the name Amanda. Like, oh, yeah, hablé con Amanda, right? It was a thing that our city really provided, actual relief with helping them understand what was happening in conjunction with our Chamber of Commerce, but just that personal touch was that. And then to Maricela, to Debbie's question, I had the same thought. Like the contractors might not be a group that someone had thought about, and we knew Pakun was really taking care of the workers and the county taking care of the farmers. But for Maricela to really, who's lived in this community forever, she knew that specific point, and that's probably one of the most important points in this whole thing, is being able to work with them. And so being on the phone with all of them and making that happen. And then, of course, Tommy, if you're out there, congratulations to the 20,000 hits like that. I told him that immediately, such an amazing video. Little jealous, my little homemade videos of our assisted living tours with the fire department didn't get as many hits, but that's because that was such an excellent video. So,
Mr. Mayor?
Please.
Hey, Jesse and Irene, can you guys talk just a little bit? What you guys have done is pretty epic. What's the feeling out there right now as we're, there's a lot of other things going on in society right now, and this is you guys put a lot of work into this. What's the feeling for the momentum behind the steps of things you've done so far?
I'll let you speak as well, Irene, but I think from my perspective, it has slowed down. As we saw the media kind of follow a different direction with much needed to be to bring light into the current national scape is what it needs to be. The COVID talk has slowed down, and so we're trying to find avenues in which to bring in those key groups that still need support and access, and still canvassing best we can to say, hey, there is a lot going on, we understand, but the virus is still there, and we don't want you to forget that because we don't want this to peak up again. So I think in our messaging, we've really been trying to do that. And Irene, you have some real insight with your Portland work as well, your day job. So if you'd please speak to that as well.
Yeah, I think well, first I wanted to put a shout out to Marcella and all the work that she's been doing within the city. I think you, as a city, are so fortunate to have someone with her scope of knowledge and skills, and how she's built that trust within the community. I think that no matter what happens with COVID, as hopefully we won't have flare-ups, but as that happens, I feel like the Spanish-speaking community, the Latinx community, or however this community identifies, has a true ally in the work she's doing within the city. And I guess I would pose the question back to the city in terms of working with the Russian-speaking, the Slavic, Ukrainian, Romanian community that you have in Woodburn. It just depends in which direction the city wants to go, because the base has been set, and I know that I'm passionate about this community. It's a community that I grew up with, and I'm always working on behalf of our community, whether it's reaching out to small business owners and telling them about grants in this area, or doing this outreach with the business community. It just depends on where the city wants to go. I can tell you that I'm more than happy to continue to build that out and to help the city have that platform to be able to connect with the community in an urgent situation, in an emergency situation. I'm not sure what next week is going to bring. It feels like every week it's just incredibly interesting and challenging to keep up with everything. But I think the way the city staff and the leadership here is really poised to make deeper connections within your diverse community in Woodburn, because when everybody can be engaged and the economic gap is really small, then a community really prospers. And so I think Woodburn is really poised for a strong economic recovery if we continue to do this type of outreach.
Thanks, guys.
And I can tell you that one of our council goals that we adopted is to create an inclusive environment where Woodburn residents want to participate and are engaged in the community. And so during difficult times, that we were able to do that is a testament to the work. And again, I've said this so many times, but I haven't said it in a city council meeting. But we were as we were the poster child, and they were gauging cases by per the 100,000. And there's one point in the press we were 400. Per 100,000. That was a story.
Did we lose him?
Hello?
Oh.
Can you hear me? Other
Yeah, I got
people
you,
are
man.
nodding. Yeah. Maybe that's Debbie's. But to the emphatic good news, right, we rose to 700 cases per 100,000, right? But in the last 2 weeks, we're at around 50, right? And it's just a couple a day. And that's not in first place in the county anymore, it's in 6th. And so the work that's happened, the work that was mobilized so quickly and that happened, there's no way to see those numbers in any other way than the great effect it had by the action that our city took. So thank you.
And Mayor, I just want to say one thing in closing, and I'm sorry to take up so much of your guys' time, but it's one thing to start the outreach. It's another thing for that outreach to be accepted. And our community is truly amazing. And I know you all know that as city council members. That's why you became city council members, is to represent your amazing community. But it's one thing for us to make a phone call. It's another thing for that phone call to turn into action. And that's what Woodburn continually does. And it amazes me that we're able to do what we're able to do. And we're really a small city, we're not culvert or something, but so I want to say thank you to everyone between the Sean Bairds who are doing testing, doing all these amazing things that just wouldn't be done. So in closing, I just want to say thank you, and thank you, Scott, for the opportunity, and thank you, City Council and Mayor. So
Thank you, Jesse and Irene.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
I think this has been really great work, and I would hate.
We're glad you're here to help us. I assure you.
I would hope that we can build on this work beyond COVID and start with the economic development and recovery and a lot of the other issues that we've been working to improve here in Woodburn. Community outreach has been one of my key requests that we do in the city, and that we continue to learn how to outreach and do a better job of reaching all of our community. So thank you so much for this. I don't want this work to die with COVID. I want it to continue with all the other great activities that we need help with here in Woodburn.
Alrighty.
Agreed.
All right. Thanks again. We do not have any business from the public, and so we will move to our consent agenda. So may the city recorder please read the items.
The items on the consent agenda are as follows. Woodburn City Council minutes of May 11th, 2020. Intergovernmental agreement for school resource officers. Liquor license application for Red Robin International Incorporated. Liquor license application for Abby's Incorporated. Crime statistics through April 2020. And building activity for May 2020.
Would anyone like to ask a question about any of these or remove them from the consent calendar?
I would like to ask a question or have a little bit of discussion on B. I see that Chief Herreras is on the call with us. I have a question about the intergovernmental agreement and the school resource officers.
Lisa, we're having a hard time hearing you. At least I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Yeah, maybe Heather, is Lisa's mic turned
Yeah.
on? I can hear the mayor
mic on
fine.
now. Can you hear me
Oh,
now?
that's better. Yeah,
All
I
right.
got you. Sorry.
So I would like to get a little bit of information on the intergovernmental agreement for school resource officers. I see that we have Chief Herreras on the phone with us. The questions I kind of have is, I saw where Portland is taking the resource officers out of the schools. My perspective has always been that the resource officers were a good thing in our schools. So can you give us a little bit of why it's a good idea to continue with the resource officers and why Portland may have chosen to take theirs out?
Sure, thank you. I'm Jim Ferrer, Senior Police Chief. The School Resource Officer Program is an integral part of our police department and our community. We have two school resource officers, one who works 2 middle schools and some elementary schools, and one who's assigned to the high school. And those two officers are fully engaged with students and staff to provide public safety responsibilities on campus. And that includes not only safety and security, but from the standpoint of crime reporting and investigation. A number of our child abuse and both sexual abuse and physical abuse cases, use of drugs and alcohol for young people that are certainly of a concern, come to the attention of the SROs who intervene and work with staff and the criminal justice system to help avoid young people from being introduced in the system. But one of the key roles they play is really being the first line of reporting for child physical abuse, sex abuse cases, Department of Human Services, child abuse hotline referrals, things like that, working with families on issues. And they've just done a fantastic service in our school system. And I think our community will agree with that. At least the support that I've heard throughout my 5 years here is that the community embraces the SRO program as well as the school district leadership.
So, Mr. Mayor, you're on the school board, so what's the vibe coming from the school board on it? Because I had the same question as Lisa did, especially just based on the news recently.
Yeah, the school board has not met since this time, but I can tell you, speaking not as the mayor, but as a former middle school and high school principal, our school resource officers are invaluable. And even when you contrast the national mood right now with like sentiments against the police officers, having school resource officers combats that. Just their presence, their connection, the relationships they build, and I know, as the chief said, that kids who are able to go to a safe place and talk about things happening at home and get them taken care of, that's you can't put a price on that. So,
Mr. Mayor, if I could jump into the tail end of what the chief said here. The SRO program has been important to Woodburn. And I remember when we started that program many years ago, based on concerns about security in schools. We talked a lot about active shooting scenarios and wanting to have a presence of police on campus, not only to forge those relationships, but to provide security in these, should there be an event where a police officer on scene is better than a police officer en route. And one of the things about this program that we talk about is how special it is. It takes the right kind of person to be successful in that job, to be able to work with young people and forge those relationships and have a perspective on policing that matches the expectations and the type of environment you encounter in schools and with young people. And so it's a selective process to try to pick the right kind of people who can be successful in that particular environment in the course of being police officers. And I know Chief is sensitive to that, and oftentimes we try to pick the best we have for that particular assignment. The new superintendent is coming on board, and the current superintendent and I have had conversation as recent as this evening about setting up a get together so he can introduce me to the new superintendent. And that's one of the things that I want to talk to him about is the momentum that is being built in the metro area around dissolution of SRO programs. And I'm really concerned about that because I have a deep history with SROs, not to bore you with my resume, but I commanded the school police division in Portland for about 7 years, both at the branch and precinct level. The school resource officers were responsible to me. At Salem PD, for the 5 years I was there, I oversaw the school resource program, and now in Woodburn. So I find it invaluable in policing today to have police officers integrated in the schools. And it just makes for a safer school, safer student environment, and a safer community. So I'll always advocate for that.
And Chief, are they armed while they're in the school?
Every police officer is armed at all times while on duty by department policy. So yes.
Okay. And I just want to make sure, I know we've talked about the trainings that they've had and all of that. And I just want to make sure that the police officers, the resource officers that are in the school are well trained, that they are working with kids and just everything around that.
Yes, our police officers are very well trained, and SROs are as well trained as any other police officer within our department. They have specialized training for working with students, just like a detective has specialized training in investigating crimes. So everything's relative based on the position. But in terms of being a sworn police officer, every one of us, from me to the newest recruit, has the same training because we have to maintain our certification, our standards through the state, and we have to maintain training standards for our own department at the direction of the city based on our department policies.
Thank you, Chief.
Perfect,
That really
thank you.
helps. I've always supported the SROs. I've known some of them personally, and they're fabulous individuals. It kind of struck me as a strange thing to see that Portland was trying to do away with them. Based on the experience I've had with our SROs, it didn't make any sense. So I'm happy to have your perspective. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Ellsworth, every community has different expectations and different experiences, I think. And so one of the conversations we've had is we've always been willing to work with the school district to address concerns programmatically or with with how the operation of the agreement goes. You may, I don't know, I feel like I'm becoming like the old guy here, but so many years ago when we had an economic crisis, the school district wasn't able to pay for the SRO program under our agreement because of financial constraints, and the city stepped up, and we picked up a disproportionate amount of the cost because everybody agreed that the program was successful and that the district had a real desire of maintaining it and was concerned that they would be unable to afford it. And it's continued to be that way. The city sees value in having police officers having relationships with young people as a positive thing. And it's a lot better from our experience to have police officers in schools working with children and families on some of the types of experiences these kids are having than for us to have more police out on the streets trying to figure out how to solve these crimes or work with victims. So it is it's not only is it good for the officers to interact with young people, I also think it's been healthy for young people to interact with our police officers. Now, other communities may have different experiences and different programs. They may have different ideas about how their schools should be operated. But in terms of Woodburn, I think we all feel that it's been a very positive program, and we can point to a lot of success over the years, hard examples of where good outcomes have happened because of our SRO program.
And I think as you listen to the staff and administrators throughout the school district, at least back when I was on the school board, and the officers themselves telling how their relationships led to the resolution of some great situations and some horrible situations. So, you know, at least I had the same concerns when I saw the headlines, because all I'm thinking is about all the good things that have happened within our district and with our police force. So thanks for bringing it up.
Yeah, and I think we've heard the important word throughout this, which is relationships. You know, our SROs are building relationships with the communities, with the family. That's a much better approach to policing, if you ask me. Building those relationships, being a part of your community, and training and encouraging, and your first line of defense being communication. I really want to applaud the chief and the entire police force with that mindset of training and relationship building and cooperation. So thank you, not just with the SROs, but in this time of really turmoil.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chief. I have often thought, especially in emergency situations in schools, and we've been trained and we do drills and we go through all that to be prepared, but people certainly would want a school resource officer in the building with the principal trying to protect the safety of 1,000 students. That is no small thing. So. Alrighty. Anyone else? Other questions about anything else on the consent agenda item? I'm looking at people's faces. I'm seeing shakes of heads. Okay, then we'll entertain a motion to adopt the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, so now we're going to do a series of public hearings. We're going to take a little breath here because to get through this. The first is a public hearing for fiscal year 2021 for the city budget adoption. So I will open the public hearing and ask for a staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is the consideration of the fiscal year 2021 budget for the city. The Budget Committee has reviewed this. The Budget Committee, of course, is being comprised of the City Council and our citizen members of the community. It's been approved by them and forwarded to the City Council for consideration. I'd like to, I'm not going to go into line item by line item or fund by fund. We've already spent a lot of time doing that. But what I do want to do is I'd like to highlight what is really different about this budget, given the financial pandemic situation we find ourselves in, and that this budget is status quo. It is very comparable to the current year budget that we're in the current fiscal year we're in. And with the difference being that we hope to achieve all those revenues to continue the progress that the city's been making towards a variety of programs and council goals. But we don't know if our revenues will come to fruition the way that we hope they will, just given the unpredictability of the economy right now. We're watching it closely, and we've been trying to adjust toward the end of the year corrections to build the city's cash position as much as we can to be stable for unforeseen future. So the city's financial position is reasonably good. This budget makes allocations and predicts revenues based on pre-COVID economic conditions. Hopefully we'll have a little history under our belt in the next 6 months to have a better understanding about what the financial situation and outlook will be for the city. I'm hopeful. I think the state, particularly on shared revenue and gas tax, is becoming a little more hopeful than it was even since the budget committee met to review this budget. So, you know, I feel good about the budget in the sense that it is based on the best information that we have, and we're going to be very cautious to ensure that the city remains on financial footing with uncertainty looming out there. I do appreciate everybody who spent time looking through the budget and asking questions. I have to give a call out to one citizen member of the community who's not on the budget committee, who looks at the budget every year and then tells me about it, and that would be Dave Christoff, who many of you may know in the community. I say that the budget is one of the most complicated and hardest documents we work on every year that not very many people look at in the community, but Dave does. Thank you, Dave. And also to all of you on the city council and the budget committee. Budgeting can be it's kind of an unusual event. Not a lot of people do it that often, so I know that it is work, and so I appreciate that. And Mr. Mayor, I'll answer any questions anybody has about the proposed fiscal year budget, or more so, you know, hopefully what the best circumstance could be, or the worst going forward. Are there any questions?
All right, I'm not seeing any on the screen. We'll ask for a testimony for proponents or opponents. No. We'll close the public hearing. Any other council discussion?
I have nothing to
Hey,
add.
Scott.
Carrick?
So what's the worst case scenario? Because the best case would
right now, the worst case scenario based on our general fund revenue projections estimates upwards of $2 million revenue shortfall. Worst case scenario. I suppose the worst case scenario could exceed that if the economic downturn extends well into the next fiscal year. And then potentially upwards of $250,000 to $500,000 to the utility funds, depending on people's ability to sort of restore their normal payment schedule.
And so,
And
Scott,
then, I will note, and I think I've shared this with the city council, that to date we have made spending reductions just in our operational practices of about $1.1 million between now and the end of the fiscal year to help lessen the blow of that should it come to fruition. Does that answer your question?
yeah, and I think I just wanted to follow up and say that I know the millions of people watching at home are probably wondering, well, if some of this comes to fruition, what's the city going to do when it comes to if we have to go through a cutting process? And as I recall, we have specific policies to deal with that, correct?
We do. The city has, I should say the city council has a budget and fiscal strategy that we've had for many years. It actually is a model that we have given to other cities to replicate for their own communities. So you should feel good about that. We ask our auditors to look at it, and it's always in a state of improvement. But those fiscal policies delineate what happens when there is a financial shortfall and a priority of how we look at reductions. The council has prioritized public safety programming as the highest priority, and then discretionary kind of recreational programming as the least priority. And so we go through a methodology of trying to understand, how do we preserve those things that the community really expects from us, public safety, and then try to keep the things that are really a semblance of things that are really popular, like parks and recs. But we only have what we have to work with, and so there have been times in the past, looking at other financial downturns and revenue shortfalls where we've experienced reductions of hours of operations and then wholeheartedly letting programs go. I mean, there have been several programs that the city has just stopped doing because the financial support for them was just no longer there. We also try to work with partners. We partner with other organizations and nonprofits. If there's a way to keep a service in place and reduce the city's exposure, those are other types of considerations we do. Sadly, we are well practiced at this. Hopefully we'll climb out of this soon, and we can kind of restore confidence and kind of charging forward at our pre-COVID rate of progress here.
Thanks, Scott. I appreciate it.
All right, anyone else? Sharon says no, Debbie, no. Okay, we will move on to fiscal year 2021 resolution regarding state revenue sharing. So I'd like to open that public hearing and ask for the staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a resolution agreeing to receive state shared revenue. We do this every year. It's a requirement of the state for us to receive shared revenue that includes liquor, cigarette, lottery, and those other gas tax and those other state shared revenues that the state has agreed to share with all cities in Oregon in exchange for not taxing those things ourselves, with the exception of gas tax. And so every year we go through this in order to receive those monies, which are reflected in the current year budget.
Thank you. There's no testimony from proponents or opponents, so I'll close the public hearing. Council discussion?
I have no contribution to make.
Nope. I see head shaking. Okay, then we will move to general business. And we also have no members of the public wishing to make comments at this time. So our first item of business is a resolution adopting the fiscal year FY 2021 budget in the form of Council Bill 3126.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to introduce Council Bill number 3126.
Council Bill 3126 has been duly introduced and is a resolution, and as such requires one reading. And may we please have the reading by title only if there's no objection.
Council Bill number 3126, a resolution adopting the fiscal year 2020-2021 budget, making budget appropriations, and categorizing taxes.
All right, any other comments from the staff or any discussion from the council? Seeing none, okay, may we please have a roll call vote?
Councilor Cabrales?
Yes.
Councilor Morris?
Aye.
Councilor Schaub?
Aye.
Councilor Carney?
Aye.
Councilor Ellsworth?
Aye.
Councilor Cornwell?
Yes.
All right, motion passes. Our next item is...
Mr. Mayor, I need to chime in one more time, and I can't let this go by without telling the council that Julie Moore in our office is a rock star, and we went through a number of challenges to get this budget completed, staff changeovers, pandemics, sort of you name it. And Julie, who has been an employee of the city for some 30 plus years and is scheduled to retire at the end of this year, stepped up in an amazing way, helped us onboard a new finance director, Tony Turley. And so, our staff on this budget, this was one of the harder efforts we've had. So Julie's a rock star, and you can't really see, but she's got a big gold star next to her name. She really is an outstanding public servant and community member, and she just really did a great job on this. And I can't say enough about Julie. So I just wanted you to know that this budget's here largely because of Julie.
Thank you. Okay, our next item is Council Bill number 3128.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to introduce Council Bill number 3128.
Council Bill 3128 has been duly introduced and is released.
We're on 3127.
7.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
I skipped the page. I have to do a redo, sorry.
What's that?
I will, our next item is Council Bill 3127. I misspoke. So.
Oh, 3127?
Mm-hmm.
Did I skip a page?
No, that was me. I read the bottom of the page instead of the top.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, I'd like to introduce Council Bill number 3127.
Council Bill 3127, thanks to Heather, has been duly introduced and is a resolution and as such requires one reading. And may we please have the reading by title only if there's no objection.
Council Bill number 3127, a resolution declaring the City of Woodburn's eligibility and election to receive state revenue sharing.
Any other discussion? May we please have a roll call?
Councilor Morris?
Aye.
Councilor Schaub?
Aye.
Councilor Ellsworth?
Aye.
Councilor Carney?
Aye.
Councilor Cornwell?
Yes.
Councilor Cabrales?
Yes.
Okay, Council Bill 3127 has been duly passed. Next, we have Council Bill 3128.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to introduce Council Bill number 3128.
Council Bill 3128 has been duly introduced and is a resolution and as such requires one reading. And may we please have the reading by title only if there's no objection.
Council Bill number 3128, a resolution continuing the declaration of state of local emergency in the city limits of the City of Woodburn for purposes of community recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic.
And for this one, we will have a staff report.
Mr. Mayor, this is an extension of the existing state of emergency that the city is currently in through September 1. And the reason we're proposing this tonight isn't because we think the emergency is going to get worse or not dissipate, which we're hoping for. But the city is watching state and federal funding packages that continue to be developed, and we want to ensure that we remain eligible for any of those funding opportunities by remaining in a state of emergency. Oftentimes by declaring an emergency and working under that state of emergency is a qualifying requirement to participate in those. And so by extending this to September, we think that we'll maintain our opportunity to apply for any state or federal aid as it becomes available.
So Scott, that doesn't change our phasing with the governor's directives and county directives? We're still on track?
No, we're still on track on all of that. The city will still participate in all of the governor's directives on phasing. The city would do that, potentially even getting to phase 3 while under a state of emergency. And so, really what we want to do is remain under that, keep that declaration in place to ensure that we qualify for funding as it becomes available. There may be more funding coming, and oftentimes to be eligible for federal funding, or state funding, you have to be operating in a state of emergency. So, we're continuing because we're still in an emergency, but we also want to make sure that the community doesn't miss out on any state or federal aid packages because we've let that emergency expire.
Thank you.
Any other questions or discussions? May we have a roll call vote, please?
Councilor Schaub?
Aye.
Councilor Ellsworth?
Aye.
Councilor Cornwell?
Yes.
Councilor Carney?
Yes.
Councilor Cabrales?
Yes.
Councilor Morris?
I vote aye.
All right, Council Bill 3128 has been duly passed. We next move to Council Bill 3129.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to introduce Council Bill number 3129.
Council Bill 3129 has been duly introduced and is a resolution and as such requires one reading. And may we please have the reading by title only if there's no objection.
Council Bill number 3129, a resolution authorizing an emergency business assistance grant program to support local businesses impacted by COVID-19 and the Governor's Executive Orders 20-12.
All right, staff reports.
Jamie has a staff report, but Jamie, I'd like to do the introduction quickly here. A lot of people have asked about, and the city has been watching what other communities are doing to provide assistance to their community businesses. And because of our kind of various financial forecasts that the city's been working with, we've been wanting to get closer to the end of the fiscal year to see what the city's cash carry forward position would be. And if we felt comfortable with our ending fund balances as such to try to provide a program. And so I've talked with Tony, and we have agreed that the reduction in spending that we have encountered and other savings throughout the course of the year have put the city in a position where we're comfortable with saying, you know, if up to $50,000 in grant assistance from the city to small locally owned businesses was something that we feel comfortable with proposing. When we talked about that, I then reached out to John Zobrist, who, there he is, he's on my screen, and as the chamber director, and I asked John for his ideas on how that money could most effectively be used to help small businesses in Woodburn absorb and help pay for startup costs to get them operating again and serving the community, as well as employing our local residents to help them maybe with some of those costs around sanitation or mask or social distancing improvements or things that are required to comply with the phasing program. So then when he had some ideas on that, I asked him to get together with Jamie, and that's how we got here with this proposal. And before I let Jamie talk about it, and I'm not trying to steal your thunder, Jamie, the council needs to know that because this is a current year expenditure item for the city, that this program, we would like it completed by the end of the month. So this is going to go fast. I think we talked about a first come, first served basis for qualifying applicants. And we want this money spent by June 30th so that we don't have any budgetary problems that arise. So now that I probably said everything you're going to say, Jamie, I'm just going to pass it on to you to say what I left out if I missed anything.
Well, what Scott said. No. Well, good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Councilors. Thank you, Scott, for setting the stage for that. I was thrilled when Scott called me and said, "Hey, Tony and I found some funding. Let's go ahead and do a business assistance grant program." As Jesse had alluded to earlier, Amanda's been touching base with a lot of our small businesses, our downtown businesses and Highway 99 businesses. And, you know, they need just that little bit of extra funding to kind of get them over that hoop. So working with John and Amanda, we developed a pretty stellar program. Again, we're talking about $50,000, 48 of which will go directly to the businesses, 2,000 of which will be paid to the Chamber of Commerce for their assistance in marketing and administering the program. What we're proposing is a business grant program for a maximum amount of up to $2,000. We shared with you, did somebody say something?
No, Lisa coughed.
Okay, we shared with you, along with the staff report and the resolution, the guidelines and the application. The application has been tweaked a little bit, but none of the content or the eligibility requirements. We've indicated that the eligibility for application would have to be that a business needs to be within the city limits of Woodburn. They need to have a business license or business registration. And then of course, we're providing a link to that. If they don't have it, we'll make sure they know how to get one. They need to have less than 15 full-time or part-time employees. They need to commit to continue operation when the government orders are lifted. So we're going to be asking for their plan on how they're going to remain open even after this orders are lifted and we're able to go back into full phase operations of business. And of course, we've indicated that preference will be given to those businesses that were temporarily closed or suffered reduced services due to the governor's executive order based on the COVID-19. Eligible expenses that we've outlined for this program include the rent or lease payment, mortgage payments, utility payments, property taxes, and the purchase of protective equipment, making improvements to their establishment, or buying the supplies which allow them to meet the criteria set forth in the governor's orders and allow them to get their businesses open and operating again. So we've asked them to provide that criteria. We've asked them that they need to provide us a needs statement. Let us know why they need these funds and how they're going to be utilizing these funds to build upon their businesses' recovery and how they plan on maintaining their economic viability in the months to come. One thing Scott and I talked about at depth, and then of course when John and Amanda and I were working on the criteria for the program, we had some lengthy discussions about we don't want to be able to pay somebody's bills today and have them go out of business tomorrow. We want to show that we're investing in our businesses who are going to make it to that next phase of recovery. And that's really what we're investing in, and that what the city and the chamber are investing to do for them. We have, like Scott said, we have a really tight timeline on this. We're hoping that the city council will approve and give staff the direction to move forward with the program this evening. We'll get the applications available online on Wednesday. That gives John enough time to get an online Google Doc created for the application. We do have a draft application, which you've seen. We will process, the application will open then on the 10th and end at 5 p.m. on the 18th. That gives our review committee, we have a committee of individuals working on the application review and scoring. We're not doing a first come, first serve or a lottery. We want to make sure that our communities have an opportunity to provide necessary feedback. We did discuss those two methods, which a lot of cities are using, but there are, because of the dynamic and makeup of our community and many of our businesses, it's different than some of our adjacent communities who can do a lottery system. There are needs very different in our community than in Salem, for instance. So a lottery system is something we did not think would give ample service to our business community. We thought doing more of a scoring based on need, use of funds, their business plan moving forward, and of course, giving an extra 10 points to those businesses that had to shut down due to the COVID-19 and the governor's orders. So we'll be cranking this out really fast. Amanda and I met with Tony today. I see TT's on there, so Tony's on here. He and his staff met with us today to kind of say, can we do this? Because at a minimum, it would be up to 24 applications at $2,000 a piece, or more if we have individuals, businesses asking for less than that, or if the awards are less than that, because we really want to invest and stretch these funds out as far as feasibly possible. So that's a lot to do in a very short period of time. But with Tony's feedback and his team's feedback, we think that if we do the review and the scoring and do grant announcements on the 26th, we'll be in a position to submit everything to Tony on the 26th and then be able to print those checks that following Monday, and boom, we're done before the 30th. We have 1 day for fallback.
So Jamie, I stand corrected on the first come, first serve. Thank you for that.
Yes, I'm sorry. We hadn't really.
That's
you and
okay. It's all,
it all
all
happened
good.
so fast. Yeah, we're working.
I know. Jamie, could you talk a bit about the review committee? Have you,
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to this.
So we put together a review committee. We wanted to have a relatively balanced representation from the business community, plus individuals who from the chamber and then from the city who can kind of help overcome and help out as we go along. So our review committee is 7 individuals who will review the applications, score them accordingly, and then we'll be meeting during the week of, I'm looking at my cheat sheet here, the week of the 22nd. We'll do some individual reviews, and then we'll have a couple meetings where we'll all be together to do joint reviews. And then based on the scoring criteria, we will make the recommendations for funding. And we have on that committee, of course, John Zobrist from the chamber. We have on the committee Amanda and myself from economic development, Maricela, because these applications will be accepted in English, Spanish, and Russian. We're going to do it trilingually and get those out to the public. And so we'd of course have to bring Irene in if we got Russian applications. We have Shelley Egley, who's currently the chair of the Woodburn Downtown Association, and I believe she serves on the chamber board as well. We have Tracy Flack from our finance department. And we asked Councilor Cabrales if she would be interested in being involved on the committee for review as well. So that's our review committee at this time. We've talked. I'm sorry, Debbie.
I'm so sorry. It logged me out because we apparently are using too much Wi-Fi up in this house. Did you let them know that I'm on the committee?
Yes, we had extended the invitation to Debbie to see if she would, or Councilor Cabrales, to participate in the review committee. We had talked about having a business person from the downtown or on the highway. However, that was going to be kind of hard because we know from our communications and our conversations with those businesses, they may very well be applying. Therefore, it would exclude them from eligibility if they were serving on the review committee. So we tried to be as fair and equitable, and with Councilor Cabrales's work in the community and through the school district, we thought that would be a really nice ask as well. So that is our review committee at this time. And I know it's a pretty good sized review committee, but I think we could get anywhere from 50 to 100 applications. So we're going to need to have enough people at the table who can go through the review and understand the process. And it was Tony's recommendation today to bring Tracy on. And I thought that was really a smart idea to bring somebody from finance department on, because she can really kind of keep the motion moving forward in processing these applications. I think that's been the biggest challenge. The challenge that some of our partners in other communities have suffered from is getting to that end and having to process all the payments have been kind of a challenge for them at times. But it's a pretty clean, straightforward, very fast moving project. And we're excited to be offering even a little bit of investment in our business community will go a really long way for these businesses.
Thanks, Jamie. I shared with the city manager just a couple of days ago. This week I learned that in Silverton, their model, the Silverton Rotary Club, initiated a process like this and is working with the city to establish a fund. And so I spoke with the city manager about the possibility of challenging other service clubs or other businesses who would like to, who are doing fine or doing well, who might like to donate to this as well. So.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's other avenues we can pursue. We really have an opportunity to put some funding out into the business community now, which I think is wonderful that Scott was able to allocate some funds for that. And again, I'm so appreciative in the business community is. I know that there's a funding pool coming up through Business Oregon for their emergency grant dollars, round 3. And now that we have these funds, and even if we completely expend them, we can go back and use them as a match. So we'll be pursuing an additional $50,000 from Business Oregon. That will be more in the July timeframe, according to our business resource officer there. But that's a good opportunity. I'm going to keep turning over rocks and looking under leaves and seeing if we can find just that little bit of additional funding, because telling any business no is going to be painful. But if we can keep looking for additional funding opportunities, so any ideas or recommendations or resources would be phenomenal.
Well, Mr. Zobrist, do you have some things to add to that? Is there any thunder left for you?
So, part of this process is really exciting. We've been talking about it amongst ourselves, Amanda and Jamie and others in the community since, the beginning, when you saw, Marion County doing some similar things. And, we just weren't really sure if, where in Woodburn we would be able to come up with this type of funding. So I have to say hats off to Scott and Tony to, really figure out a way to bring some funds to the table to start the process and, really put us on the track to help, because there are so many people, particularly in the services, personal services that, they received no unemployment to date. They've, we're told they couldn't work for 2 months. They're still paying the rent in their location. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. But the great part about this process is, getting the applications. It would be great if we got 25 applications and we did 25, grants of a couple $1,000s ish. But the thought is we're probably going to get more. And I know when Marion County did theirs, it was an eye opener on how many people they broke the website the first day when they were turning them in. That's how much pent up demand there was for this type of assistance. And so the goal is to, get as many applications as possible, and working with the service clubs, other organizations. I know, Eric and we talked a little bit about Rotary doing it. Jamie's talking about Business Oregon. This is something that we can then continue with, either a public-private partnership of sorts. If we have a bucket of need, of defined need, where we've taken in these applications, it's really important that then we say, okay, we have the need, we can go out and sell the need, and we could probably find money, and there'll be people who'd be happy to help. And identifying it is going to be critical. But the other thing, initially, there's, well, how do you choose? Well, first come, first serve seems the fairest. And we got to talking, and there's a lot of challenges in communicating. Let's talk about earlier in the evening, we're talking about the different communities that we have. And what we think we're communicating, we're getting the information out there. There are other avenues. And so there may be, if we did it and only did it for a few days, and there's a huge rush and we got a bunch of applications, there are a bunch of people, oh my goodness, I didn't know about that. So we wanted to be very conscious about that and getting the information out to the right people and doing a good job. And so we're working as a team. There should be an article in this week's print edition. There's definitely going to be one in the online edition. Extensive social media and online constant contact from our side and from the city side. And we plan on utilizing the radio, and did not think about until we heard from Irene today. That's a definite option as well. Just getting the information out there to get as many people aware of this program as possible. So thanks again to everybody. And I can't say enough about Jamie. We pored over this for a few hours, and she took a batch of notes, and literally by noon the next day had substantially 95% of what you were given already put together. And it's just the speed and the accuracy which she did, that was just phenomenal.
Thank you, John.
Any other questions or comments?
I do have a question. What is the source of funds?
Councilor Carney, the source of funds will be general fund discretionary dollars from a variety of different departments that have generated savings throughout the course of the year. So Tony's going to be looking at these awards, and then we're going to roll them up into the grant payments. Tony, have you had a chance, is there anything you want to say about that?
Most of it's going to come from a non-departmental category where we have a substantial savings over what it was budgeted there in the year. But we did pull from some other programs that, one example would be, there's an urban forest program that we just haven't spent very much money from this year in the budget, so that we were able to pull some money from there. But we have a substantial amount that's in the non-departmental other professional services that we haven't spent the budget on. And so those two categories would be the main ones. And then there's some other small ones if we need to.
Okay, that explains it, but I have a follow-up question. Is it possible that if we receive grant funds that are COVID-19 from the state or federal, that we can backfill?
No, these funds.
I'm sorry, I'll take a shot at it, then everybody else can chime in. Probably not, would be my guess. Most of the aid that's coming down is targeting specifically for COVID-related costs to local government. So to give you an example, Councilor Carney, we submitted a reimbursement request for $22,000 and change for expenses that the city experienced directly related to COVID, eligible expenses. To date, lost revenue or these types of local economic programs have not been eligible. Maybe that could change, but I don't know. I don't know of any program that would do that as of yet. Jamie, do you?
No, and on the Business Oregon emergency funding program I'm talking about, this $50,000 even fully expended, would serve as a match to get an additional 50,000 for our community. There's not a reimbursement. That was specifically asked on one of the telephone calls I was on with peers, and they said, no, you can't reimburse, that's your match. You have to actually put that out into your business community.
I don't want to get political, but there has been talk at the state and federal level about support for local governments and trying to maintain their financial viability through this, since we provide critical services. I heard a rumor that one important senator somewhere said that cities should just go bankrupt, but which clearly is not good. So hopefully there will be aid that will look at programs that the cities are putting into communities, and also lost revenues that cities are absorbing as being responsive to the COVID-19 crisis. But so far that hasn't materialized.
Yeah,
well,
I think
Scott,
that,
the one comment I would make on that is that many people at higher levels in government are talking about not bailing out cities and municipalities that were in trouble to begin with. And I would say that Woodburn was definitely not one of those cities. We're very conservative and we have a good foundation for our budgeting and how we do our budgeting. So I was super happy to hear when you guys were able to put this plan together. I think, every little bit helps, and that's really what the community looks for from government during tough times, is doing what we can with what we have. So good work.
Thank you.
I can tell you too that I know that Scott and Councilor Morris have been on the Friday at 10 o'clock calls with the Oregon League of Cities, and they are, and a number of you have chimed in, maybe have been on those with the, and so there's a strong lobby from the National Director of the United States League of Cities, as well as and the Oregon League of Cities is doing tremendous work with the legislature and with these national legislation. So we
Mr.
they
Mayor,
got our backs.
Thank you for saying that, Mr. Mayor. I mean, I'll just I'm on the board for the League of Oregon Cities right now, halfway through my term on that board, and I know that they are working really hard. And there's a lot of voices at the table trying to communicate to elected officials in both state and federal level about the need of local government, where the rubber meets the road. Right, this is where things happen, and we could do a lot if we had legislative reform, and if we had financial aid that was that cities could direct, since cities are where most people live and where cities are where most services are provided. So thank you for saying that. I'll pass that along.
Any other questions or comments?
Probably one of the best things about COVID has been that many officials from very high up to right down to the boots on the ground are getting a good civics lesson on how government actually works. So that's been enlightening on a lot of those calls too. Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Anyone else? On the last call we were on, and these are like 500 people on these calls by the time there's mayors and city managers and city councilors. I had asked a question to the Oregon Health Authority person, and back to our kudos to be that we talked about before, but especially with this resolution. She was effusive in her praise for what the city of Woodburn was able to do. All the other mayors were like, probably felt sorry for me during all this time, and so the Oregon Health Authority was publicly said to about 500 people on that call what a tremendous job that Woodburn has done to turn our situation around. So it's a good group to be involved with. So. All right, so that will conclude our discussion. Is there a roll call vote?
Mm-hmm. Councillor Carney?
Aye.
Councillor Morris?
Aye.
Councillor Schaub?
Aye.
Councillor Cabrales?
Aye.
Councillor Ellsworth?
Aye.
Councillor Cornwell?
Yes.
All right, Council Bill 3129 has been duly passed.
Thank you from your business community.
Good job.
We should get some political capital out of that.
So our next is approval of a property line adjustment agreement that between the City of Woodburn and the Woodburn School District. Requires a motion and a second.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to make a motion that we approve the property line adjustment agreement between the City of Woodburn and the Woodburn School District to facilitate the new city production well.
I second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. All right, we're down to F. The CDBG revolving loan funds also requires a second and a motion, or motion and a second.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that we authorize the city administrator to submit a letter to Business Oregon requesting the reallocation of community development block grant housing rehab program income to a qualified nonprofit agency for use to establish a mortgage assistant revolving loan program for eligible low to moderate income Woodburn residents.
I second.
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Sorry.
I'm
Slow
getting the
down on the
feeling that Scott
opposed.
wanted to say something about this before.
Yeah, it would be good to hear something, but yeah.
I'll just mention it quickly that this is an important topic. The city has $435,000 in housing rehabilitation loan grant dollars that have accumulated from loan paybacks from grants that were issued in the 90s through the housing and urban development. It's a long and twisted story. And this money is highly regulated by federal and state law. And the city can't really use this money for anything except to give it back to the state at some point. So what we've asked is that the state of Oregon modify its plan statewide to allow the city to take these monies and put them back into the community as low-income homeowner mortgage assistance loans that are zero interest and no principal. Very good deal.
Yeah.
to keep people in their homes. And we thought we had very little to no chance of them even giving us the time of day. But we had McKinsey write a fantastic legal opinion, and we gave it to the state. We had a meeting, and to our surprise, they said, make a proposal, tell us how it will work, and we'll consider it. So what this letter does is it is a city council formally asking the state of Oregon to modify its plan to help this city, and many cities in Oregon will follow if we pull this off, because a lot of cities have these dollars they can't use, to put them right back into the community to help low-income property owners with mortgage assistance. Under the same rules for the old program, except for housing rehab, it's going to help people who have fallen behind in mortgage payments and are in jeopardy of losing their homes because of COVID-19. And so we appreciate this, and I think you should recognize that this is innovative, and potentially, if this is successful, will change the way the state of Oregon regulates these dollars, and will allow not just Woodburn, but a lot of cities to put these dollars back to work to help people in their communities. So we're taking a hard run at this, and this is a good start. I think there's a good chance we'll pull this off. So I just want to say that's what we're doing. Thanks.
I'd happily vote again to say, yes, let's do this, so.
Sorry, my apologies for not asking for questions or discussions at times. Anyone else?
No, I thought this was a great suggestion when it was brought up at the last city council meeting. We've talked about those dollars. If you've sat on the budget committee, you know about those dollars, you know that they're there and that we can't do anything with them. So this would be a great opportunity.
All right, kudos to the brilliant minds who put that together. All right, we're on to item 12, Planning Commission. Land use actions, we have two. Call-up briefings. One, the Planning Division staff approval of a preliminary partition of parcel 3. Partition plat 2019-69 and the Smith Creek. And we have B, call-up briefing, Planning Commission approval of design review, phasing plan, property line adjustment, street exceptions, variance applications for Allison Way apartments on 3 lots with no street addresses and located at the intersection of Stacey Allison Way and Hooper Street. So would anyone on the council wish to call up one of these items?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to call up item B, Allison Way apartments.
All right. Can we get a staff report on this?
Yes. let me make sure I'm sharing it with you. Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Great. So good evening. I'm Chris Kerr, the Community Development Director. I just want to take an opportunity to just do a real brief summary of the project and the Planning Commission decision for this particular item, if that's all right. It won't be too long, but I hope it's worthwhile. So as you know, this is not a hearing this evening. You're really just looking at whether or not to call up a Planning Commission approval for review. So you're just looking to look at a summary of the project, or I'm going to provide a summary of the project, and the hope is that there's no deliberation on this item this evening. Oh, give me 1 second. Here we go. I'm trying to bring my
Hey, Chris, while you're navigating that, can you speak a little bit to deliberations? So counselors shouldn't be arguing amongst ourselves, but we can definitely argue with staff and stuff like that, right?
Of course. Yeah, and the point here is that again, this is not a noticed meeting, a noticed hearing. So I can provide you with facts of the case and what happened at the Planning Commission meeting. I just want to make sure that there isn't any deliberation that would take place. In case the council decides to call this up, that would be the time to have it during that meeting.
Very good, thank you.
Sure. So on May 28th, the commission approved the application, including all the variances, and I'll touch on the details of the variances in a moment, a little further down in the presentation. And they're summarized on page 5 of the report that I gave you, or that was provided for this hearing. So tonight, you may, by majority vote, initiate a review of the Planning Commission's approval to consider overturning or modifying that decision after hearing testimony at a future meeting. So essentially, if you make a decision to review this decision, what will happen is staff will put together a notice and will establish a quasi-judicial public hearing for what will probably be July 13th. And if you don't take any action on it tonight, then the Planning Commission decision that was made will stand, and that'll be the final decision. There is an opportunity for people to appeal that decision still, but I know that the applicant's not going to be appealing it, and we haven't heard anything from any neighbors yet. So just to bring you up to speed on where the project is, before I walk through some of the details, this property is zoned CG, commercial zoning, commercial general. And as you might recall, last year, the city council moved forward and made a modification to our zoning code to prohibit multifamily housing and multifamily residential units from being proposed within our interchange management overlay, which is an overlay in our commercial district over near I-5. So if this application were to come in today, this would not be a permitted use in the district. But this application that went to the Planning Commission was actually proposed and submitted before the council made that change. So it's in effect a permitted use at this location, and that's how it's getting reviewed, if you had any questions about it. And if you're looking along here, this is I-5. The property abuts Stacey, Allison. This is Hooper Street that cuts through in this component. And when you drive down Stacey, Allison, this is where the terminus and the end of Stacey, Allison is, right at the top half of the property. Again, this is that same point. This is where Hooper Street cuts across. This is Stacey, Allison. And the area that's in white on Stacey, Allison's already paved, and the area that's darker here would be for an improvement for the applicant. It's a total of 586 apartments. There's 2 phases. The first phase is north of Hooper Street, and the remaining portion is phase 2 on the south side of Hooper Street. There are a lot of on-site amenities, different recreation buildings. There's a public plaza that's been proposed, and there are some open landscape courtyards between the buildings. In addition, there are a lot of off-site public improvements. Most of those are transportation related, and I'll talk about those in a second. And there are 6 specific variance requests from the applicant. I'll touch on those and be more specific. And there are some custom street cross sections. Essentially, this is what happens within the public right-of-way and there's some street exception language proposed. Hooper Street's actually proposed to have some on-street parking. This is a rendering, give you an idea of how it sort of fits in with the surrounding properties. It was provided by the applicant. Up here, this is Cascade Meadows. This is the apartment complex on the north side of Hooper. And southeast of the subject property, this is the Paradise Point single-family homes in that RSN zoning district, single-family zoning district. And when people came and spoke, they were 2 residents who came at our planning commission meeting. They were from this neighborhood. Give you an idea of the 3-story walk-up type construction that's proposed. This is actually pretty similar to what was recently approved for Pacific Valley, which is the apartments that were approved on Highway 99 about 6 months ago. With regard to the specific conditions of approval, aside from just memorializing the site plan and making sure it gets developed the way it's proposed, a lot of the conditions specifically get into trying to fill in gaps within the city's sidewalk and a lot of the curb and sidewalk openings that we have and areas we needed to redevelop. And the point behind that is to try to encourage more walking and cycling around the area. There's also ongoing surveying of the parking usage out there. I'll touch on that in a minute when we get to the variance. And there's specific funds proposed that the applicant will have to pay for to help the city complete transportation studies at 3 different intersections. And these are on Evergreen. There's also additional funds to study and make, to figure out what kind of improvements we need to make to enhance our local bus service. This is a per unit fee of a little over $200. That's one of the conditions of approval that would go towards that transit types of improvements. There's also 2 bus shelters proposed or a fee in lieu. And again, a few other offsite improvements, mostly transportation related. I wanted to highlight a few of them. The areas that you see in blue, the dashed lines, are some of these gaps that are being proposed to fill in for sidewalks. These are important sidewalk gaps that the city's been looking to improve. Many of these are included in our transportation system plan. Both north and south of the property, a lot on Evergreen, a lot on Hooper as it comes across in front of the property, as well as in front of, as you see, as you go further north along Hayes Street. And this would be Hayes Street beyond the improvements, of course, that the city's going to be completing on the east of here. In terms of variances, as I said, there are 6 of them. The first one has to do with driveway widths. Our code requires 24-foot drive aisle widths. The applicant's proposing 20, and that would be the case except where fire access is required to get into the property. That driveway width number 1 variance is very similar to the drive aisle width component of number 4. One is where the drive aisle, these are of course private driveways that lead into the parking areas of the site. So we're talking about the drive aisles on the property and the driveway width leading into it. The second one is the parking ratio variance, which is requested. The applicant's requesting 1.77 stalls per dwelling unit, as opposed to 2 stalls, parking stalls per unit, which is required under our code. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in detail in a second. There's also a requirement, number 3, or a variance request on number 3 for compact parking percentage. Our code allows, these are really smaller spaces. Our code allows you to put up to 20% of the spaces on your property to have slightly smaller parking space widths and lengths. The applicant's proposing a little over 53%. There's also a variance from the parking area curb heights. These are the curbs that are adjacent to the landscape areas around parking areas. The applicants claim that because they're going to have a lot of smaller vehicles and hybrid vehicles, they're going to have much lower to the ground, and they need lower clearance for 4 inches rather than 6. And there's an architectural wall requirement. As you saw, this property abuts a single-family zoning district on the east side. And because it has commercial zoning today and it's adjacent to some residential zoning, our code requires an architectural wall, and the applicant's requesting an enhanced landscape buffer in lieu of that. There is a condition that requires some fencing where there's head-in parking adjacent to the existing residential to the east. But the remainder of it would be landscaping and wouldn't it not include a wall. I want to come back for a second on the parking ratio variance. Again, this is a request to provide essentially about 130 less parking spaces than is required under the code. The staff recommendation was to deny that request, but the applicant provided information and a justification that the planning commission was comfortable, made the planning commission comfortable with approving it. One big component of that was the applicant provided a table, which is a real survey of how other cities, similar cities in the area, provide multifamily parking. What they generally found was that the average parking ratio for other cities was closer to probably 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit for multifamily, where of course the Woodburns is 2.0 spaces per dwelling unit. That and the fact that they were comfortable with the applicant's management plan they had proposed. The applicant's actually going to have specific permit required parking on their site. So after we received, the applicant provided their testimony at the meeting, we received some testimony from neighbors. We had 2 neighbors who provided testimony, generally dealing with the parking space variance. They were concerned about adverse impacts of it overflowing into their adjacent properties and then within the public right-of-way close to them. They were concerned about general truck and traffic impacts, and we had some questions about school capacity. The Planning Commission completed their deliberation, and basically it revolved around these same issues: traffic impacts, responding to the parking space variance, discussions back and forth about how they thought it might work, concerned about the architectural wall and what the buffer might look like, and an evergreen path, and I'll talk about that in a moment. The Planning Commission voted on a 3-2 vote to approve the application with all of the variances that were requested by the applicant. And again, as I said, we haven't had any appeals filed yet, but there's about another week left before we could receive one. As part of the approval, I wanted to kind of clarify, the Planning Commission approved the application with the following changes that were found within the staff recommendations that went to them. The first thing it did was they removed a condition requiring what we call the evergreen path. I talked about a lot of these off-site enhancements and improvements that were proposed for sidewalks and a lot of the pedestrian and bike areas around the property. One of them is here. I just wanted to point it out to you. This is at the end of Citadel and Baylor. This is within the Montebello subdivision, just east of Harvard, east of the property. If you look over on the east side, on the right side of the picture, you'll see on the bottom, this is the Smith approval. See Ben Brown Lane here? This is that Smith subdivision. One aspect of it was to have a trail that connects into this area, which is a future unimproved right-of-way for Evergreen. And the condition was going to have the applicant complete that up to the point where it currently would connect where Baylor Street has an existing pedestrian path that comes in here. So it basically continued the path within the unimproved right-of-way. The Planning Commission talked about it. While they thought it was an important improvement, they thought that they really didn't see the nexus to the actual site with this particular application, and they wanted to take that out of the conditions. The second thing that they talked about was they specifically elected not to have a landscaped median along Stacey Allison Way. When the application and the staff report went to the Planning Commission, it included a Planning Commission recommendation to include a landscape median within Stacey Allison. There's a left turn lane that runs for the majority of the length of Stacey Allison Way. But right before the meeting, we received some comments and concerns from our Public Works Department about the maintenance of that landscape median, as well as concerns about it not really being conducive to the future truck traffic we're anticipating on Stacey Allison. There were concerns that the Planning Commission, the Public Works Department raised. We brought them up with the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission was in agreement that should probably be removed, and we'll just leave it as a left turn lane in Stacey Allison. And again, as I called out, the planning commission specifically approved the requested variance to allow parking at a rate of 1.77 spaces per unit instead of 2. So that's really the issue before you. You can, by majority vote, initiate a review of the planning commission approval to consider overturning or modifying that decision after we hold a public hearing at a future meeting. And again, I expect that would be July 13th.
Okay, so just to reiterate, this is not a thing to discuss necessarily at this time, but whether to vote to review this at our next meeting.
I
Mr. Mayor,
did
can I
have
ask a
one
quick
question.
question?
I had a question for the planning director.
Go ahead.
You didn't mention anything about, and perhaps I didn't hear it, anything about parking on Stacey Allison Way. Is it did the planning commission permit it, or did they decline?
Yeah, so right before the planning commission meeting, the applicant proposed allowing parking along Stacey Allison Way. Staff did not support that, and the planning commission heard that request and agreed that it wasn't appropriate and it's not part of the approval.
So as it stands right now, Stacey Allison Way in this vicinity will have no parking.
That's correct.
Okay, very good.
Other questions?
Chris, can you speak to why staff didn't recommend the parking variance?
Well, in this case, the principal issue for staff when we make recommendations on variances is to consider whether or not they're going to have adverse impacts on the surrounding property owners. That's really one of the most important issues for us. And what we found, particularly with the Cascade Meadows apartment building up there, is that oftentimes what you get when the opportunity is there and you don't have enough parking on site is you get spillover into the, not just onto the existing right-of-way, but you get it within the residential neighborhoods that are nearby. That's taken place. I've personally fielded at least a half a dozen complaints from the neighbors about the existing apartments to the north there. And it's a real concern that we had. This is a vacant site. In staff's opinion, there's no reason they couldn't design it to meet our code requirements for 2.0 spaces per unit. And again, the real basis for us is if we think there may be adverse impacts, the applicant better have a fantastic hardship why they can't meet our code.
Thank you, Chris.
Other questions? My only
So do
question,
they think that they're not gonna get any like bigger cars, or do they think everyone can get a hybrid?
that was my question.
Well, I'd like to make a motion that we call this project up for review.
I second.
It's been moved and seconded that we call up the Planning Commission approval of design review for Stacey Allison Way Apartments for review. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Opposed?
All right, the motion carries.
Nay.
All right, at 9:15, we will move to the city administrator's report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have two things. One of the things I want to talk briefly about is earlier tonight, the council held a moment of silence for people who have passed and sort of the state of the nation, but particularly George Floyd. What happened to Mr. Floyd has been pretty upsetting to me and members of our staff. People have been in this business for a long time. We saw that video and it's just really haunted a lot of us, including me. I've been through a range of emotions. I've been upset. I've been angry. I've been disappointed. For all the years that people have worked so hard in community service and policing to have something so horrific like that, it just paints us all. We feel responsible for it, I think. And Chief and I worked to put out a statement on behalf of the police agency, the city, that was honest, and we tried to express where we felt, how we felt about it. And Chief has been, I know Chief has talked a lot with our police officers about what has happened in the community, and it goes to reinforce our values and our expectations. And a couple things that I just want to tell the council is that we try to be reflective of our values and our community and what is expected of us. And although our police department and our city have had, steps forward and steps back in the past, what I feel is honorable is that the leadership of this community and this organization deal with it. And I've said many times in the last week and a half that if you're a racist or a bigot or a bully, you won't work for the city of Woodburn. It's not something that we tolerate in people who apply for jobs here or people who work for our organization. And if we think there's an issue, we've always dealt with it. The other thing I wanted to say too is that, the city became aware of a planned protest for this Friday. It'll be a protest at Centennial Park and then a march along a route that is, as I understand, is currently in flux, but being coordinated with our police department. And I want to say that to the council that from the city's perspective, from a staffing perspective and the police chief's perspective, the city encourages and supports peaceful First Amendment expression. I think you're going to find myself and others participating in that event, and that we encourage people who have opinions to express them peacefully. The city is working to the credit of the organizers. We are working with them and other organizations in the community. Chief and I had an excellent conversation with Pukun this past week, who's also participating in this and who the city has an excellent relationship with. We feel very good about their involvement in our past experiences with protests and Pukun and the residents of Woodburn. And I don't want the community to be fearful of this event. I know that there have been images from other cities that are upsetting to some people, and certainly some people have created issues, but Woodburn is not that way. Woodburn is a slice of America, and it represents, I think, what is important about our country, which is that everybody comes here for a better place, and that we are a community because what we have in common is our differences. Some people in our community have called that the cultural advantage, and we have a lot of faith in the people in our community. So that protest is planned Friday at 5 o'clock. Yeah, it's been published in the paper. And I also want to just give a shout out to Police Chief. I think he's still on the line here. But Chief and our staff share these values and these things that I've just said, and support people who want to peacefully protest and want to ensure that people have that right and that they can do so. And I know that Chief is involved in this, and as well as his team. And we expect there'll be a peaceful, constitutionally protected expression of speech, and we hope that the messages that come out of there help facilitate change for not only our country, but the hearts and minds of people in our community as well. And so, Mr. Mayor, that's all I have to tell the council tonight, unless there are any questions.
Okay, I want to thank the police chief and the city manager for just being so strong in their convictions about this. And shout out to Councilor Cabrales, who had called and said, "Hey, did you get a call or a text from Kaya Mathis, who's part of the story you'll read in the Woodburn Independent, and happened to be a former student of the high school." And so gave her a quick call back. She explained what it was, I sat down and sent an email to the city manager and the chief police, and they have just been fabulous with, they're like 22 years old, these two students. They graduated 2016, and not only are they feeling good about their community and the response from our city and our police force, but they're learning to be members of the community. And back to one of our council goals is people having that, creating an environment where our citizens are wanting and willing to be engaged is just another example of this. So thanks to that. All right, councilor reports.
Oh,
Councilor Ellsworth?
Looking at me, huh?
I'm looking at Ellsworth.
These are difficult times, not just with COVID, but with everything else that's going on in our community. We have businesses struggling, we have families struggling, and now we have the things that we've recently seen in the media. And I do appreciate the letter that Chief and Scott wrote, the open letter. It really touched my heart. The other thing that touched my heart was the Woodburn is open. When I watched that video, and I knew how much this COVID has impacted our citizens, our small businesses. It actually, I was choked up. I watched it at work, and I was really choked up because I feel deeply for our citizens, our businesses, the people that have lost their jobs or are struggling. The one thing that I want to say is, while I'm not likely to be somebody carrying a sign and protesting, I am somebody that believes in relationships. We talked earlier this evening about forming relationships. So I just want to open up the possibility, if anybody wants to talk about any of this, if anybody has a perspective they think that I'm not putting forth at council, my email address and my phone number are both available on the city's website. I welcome anyone to call me and sit down and talk. I'm happy to do the social distancing with the mask and everything, and sit across the table from anybody that feels that their voice is not being heard. I totally believe that we live in a democracy and everyone has the right to be heard. And if you feel like you're not being heard, please, my phone number, my email address, if you see me in the grocery store, stop me. I want to listen. That is one of the things that I truly believe is listening to the concerns of our citizens and building those relationships and making sure that I am open. So if anybody out there wants to sit down and have a conversation, please reach out to me. I do everything I can to reach out in the public, but it's not always easy to build those bridges and form those relationships. So I want everybody to be safe, and I'm really proud of the work that we do here in Woodburn to take care of one another, to take care of our community. So thank you.
Councilor Carney?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I would like to reinforce the message that you just delivered, and Councilor Ellsworth and Scott Derrickson. And I'd also like to reinforce the very sensitive and timely letter that was generated by our city administrator and our police chief. Tonight during our council meeting, we discussed different communities within our city. We discussed the Russian-speaking community. We discussed the Latin community that speaks mostly Spanish and other indigenous languages. And I'm reminded that we're a community where we have welcomed people that have been marginalized in their lives and in other locations where they lived and grew up. In my own life, my parents were marginalized and they were discriminated against where they grew up. I myself was marginalized when I was growing up and discriminated against. It's a sense and a feeling that I have very deep in my heart and in my memory. And it's something I don't like to see happen to other people around me. So I echo the sentiments of Councilor Ellsworth. My email is available. My telephone number is available. Please call me if you have anything that you wish to discuss, or any concerns that you have regarding city government or city policy. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to the screen. Councilor Cornwell.
I am speechless. I just would like to go along and agree with what the other two said, Lisa, and just the other counselors. This has been a really hard time because just so many things. It's not a world that I ever thought I'd see. And as they said, I'm here to talk or relate in any way I can to help other people out and just reach out, just as I might reach out to you. I feel really supported. I've talked to many counselors this week, as well as the mayor this week, and Scott, and I just feel like we are there for each other as well, and it makes me feel safe. I feel safe here in Woodburn, and I'm very proud of that, very proud. And that's all.
Councilor Morris.
Like the lottery, you never know if you're going to win or not. I wasn't prepared to win this round of it, so thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would echo the other councilors' comments. These are tough times, and I think, like Mary Beth just said, talking to each other is helpful. I did want to give some props to the chief because I've been writing him pretty hard about speeding in Woodburn, which is, seems like a very minor thing in these times, but it definitely affects not only people in my ward, but around the city. And I know there was some stuff being done in the background, and as I was reflecting over the last week, there's been very little speeding on my street lately. So that's some feedback, Chief, you can pass along to the officers on the beat out there, and that's greatly appreciated. One of the things I've been doing a lot in the last week or so, as events have been happening, is trying to find tangible things that we can do as citizens, and more importantly, as representatives of our city. And one of the things that I was able to dig into was the 8 Can't Wait initiatives. And Chief, I was hoping you might have a chance to talk a little bit about that, because those are some tangible things that I think some of them we're doing already, and some of them maybe we could take some steps to move in the right direction around law enforcement and public safety.
Sure, I'm happy to chat anytime with any of you about any of those issues. Just let me know when you think it's appropriate, and I'm happy to meet with you and talk through it.
Chief, do you think that any of those are something as I look through them, it's talking about like force continuum and things of that sort. It seems like it would be a bigger discussion for council and maybe a full presentation kind of thing. But as I read through it, Oregon law enforcement, I think, is way ahead of the curve on many of those topics, such as banning chokeholds and strangleholds, de-escalation training, requiring warning before shooting. I hadn't really heard of that, but I figured that was something maybe you could speak to a little bit. Exhausting all other alternatives. Duties to intervene, I'm pretty positive I read that in your letter, that's something that Oregon law officers are required to do. And then banning shooting at moving vehicles, which seems like a movie thing, but it must be happening. So yeah, just some of these things I think are very tangible, and I can wrap my head around tangible things that we can do that people are recommending. So that's all I have.
There are 8 big picture items in the hashtag 8 Can't Wait campaign. That is it's a project being led by some kind of nonprofit named Campaign Zero. I don't know much about these folks. This is the first I've seen this, but these categories are very familiar to me. These date back to the early 2000s when we were working on police reform issues in the metro area, and I'm happy I can run through these 8 pretty darn quick. So it might be helpful if I do that. The first one is banning chokeholds and strangleholds, and the carotid control hold or carotid restraint, also known as a choke or sleeper hold, is prohibited within the Woodburn Police Department, categorized as deadly physical force. So in other words, it isn't something we train. It isn't something that we authorized, but if a police officer is in a position where they're authorized under the law to use deadly physical force, it would be an appropriate action to save the life of the officer or another person. The next category is requiring de-escalation. And we train in de-escalation quite frequently. Our policies reflect the concept of de-escalation more times than I could even recite to you. I've mandated that all of our officers go through crisis intervention training, where one of the key components is de-escalation and disengagement. We have, as you know, we're members of the Marion County Mobile Crisis Response Team, where we pair up a police officer and a mental health counselor. And that is a key component to de-escalation. Much of our training is wrapped around the concept of de-escalation and even walking away from incidents, that it would be appropriate for the police just to leave, to bring the tone down and relax things to bring it to a safe conclusion. So I'm confident that we meet the recommendations there. Requiring a warning before shooting is a pretty broad category. It would be difficult at best to require that. If you think about a split-second decision where a police officer has to make an immediate decision to defend their life or of someone else, and they have to employ the use of a firearm, it might not be feasible to give a warning. A landmark U.S. Supreme Court case, Tennessee versus Gardner, actually requires that when about to use deadly force on a fleeing felon, that some warning be given before shooting if feasible. So that is codified in our policy, and we've trained that for years. So I think we have that box checked. The next one is requiring exhaustion of all alternatives before shooting. And that's another broad category that I don't think is practical. But we have a series of factors that we train on and that we educate our police officers to consider as alternatives in lieu of deadly physical force. Some of those are non-lethal forms of force, like a taser or a baton or pepper spray. Some of it is as simple as our mere presence. Some of it is conversation. So there's a variety of variables at play here, but it would be unreasonable to require every officer to exhaust all alternatives before turning to the use of deadly physical force. The next category is duty to intervene, and that is in our policies. Not only is that my expectation as the police chief, but it's clearly marked in our policy that every member of our department has an obligation and duty to intervene when another member of the department is using inappropriate force or excessive force, not only to intervene, but to report that to a supervisor. So we have that box checked. Banning shooting at moving vehicles. We have some pretty strong language that regulates the use of deadly force involving a moving vehicle, but there is some latitude given to the officer. So if an officer finds themselves in a position, for instance, just to pull one out of thin air, an officer could be in an alleyway, for instance, in a car, trying to escape, a criminal trying to escape, coming at the officer, and the officer's in the narrow alleyway, has nowhere to go. There's just nowhere to go. And the officer has no other option but to use deadly physical force. That would be appropriate under our policy, and it conforms to state and federal law. So having an outright ban on shooting at moving vehicles might cost us someone's life, either a police officer or a third person. So I think we've acted appropriate there in terms of our policy. Requiring a use of force continuum is the 7th of the 8th recommendations. And use of force continuums, starting with mere presence of a police officer, to verbal control, to physical control, to impact weapons, to non-lethal weapons, to deadly physical force, kind of a escalating ladder, if you will, was abandoned by most American police agencies several years ago when the U.S. Supreme Court decided the Graham versus Connor decision, which is our guiding case law in the United States. It's our standard on the use of physical force, and the force continuum was set aside, and the qualifier of objective reasonableness was what was replacing it. So an officer has to have any physical force, any deadly force an officer uses has to meet the test of objective reasonableness as the standard. And that is reflected in our policies throughout our use of force policies. The final category is requiring comprehensive reporting, and I have a very comprehensive reporting and accountability system in place with use of force. Anytime an officer unholsters their weapon and points it at a person, anytime an officer unholsters a taser and points it at a person, anytime an officer uses any physical force on a person, a use of force report form has to be completed that lists all the details of who, what, why, where, when, and how. A supervisor on some cases has to respond to the scene. The supervisor has to be notified by the officer employing physical force or the threat of physical force. Those reports work their way through the chain of command at each level. A sergeant reviews it and makes a recommendation on whether it was appropriate or not. It goes to the division commander, goes to the deputy chief, and ultimately lands on my desk. And we all put eyes on it to make sure that it conforms to the law and to our policy. In addition to that, we do annual analysis. Every year I submit a report to the city administrator that's a review of all of our force incidents, and the administrator has sent that to council. So I think we have that box checked. Every quarter, our use of force training team gets together and reviews all of the uses of force by members of our department and makes recommendations to me in terms of policy, training, and equipment. So I think we have that box checked. So I'm really comfortable that we meet the tests from a reasonableness standpoint for the 8 can't wait proposals.
Thanks, Chief. I think that's going to be important to have in the back of our heads over the next few weeks or few months as we take a look at how we're doing things. And I think as a society, everybody's looking at how we're doing things. So thank you for that. I truly appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you for asking.
All right, Councilor Schaub.
Well, I echo the comments made by other counselors, and I appreciate the questions that my constituents in Ward 4 have asked me, and I encourage them to contact me anytime. This is a time of change, and I feel that the city of Woodburn, and specifically our city administrator, our chief of police, and all of our staff and our mayor have done such an excellent job of reaching out, answering questions, and supplying information for our community. And this Woodburn Proud, it should be on every lamppost. I'm so proud of what we are doing. Anyway, I look forward to going down to Centennial Park on Friday, being very careful because I do have a fear of COVID-19. But I also believe it's important to stand up and make either my sign or my voice heard for the injustices that have been happening for hundreds of years. Thank you.
Councilor Cabrales.
Well, I really want to echo everything everyone else said, and I definitely agree. I want to thank the chief. Thank you so much for, I come at you with questions and I'm tough sometimes, but it's because, this is the thing that our Black brothers and sisters have to deal with every single day. And so I really appreciate that, and I will be there on Centennial on Friday. And I also want to bring to light, just, I don't know if all of you might be aware or some of you aren't aware, but kind of like what Councilor Schwab said about being Woodburn proud. Some, I don't know if you've heard of the Lindsey Graham and how she's been going out, making statements, saying things. Well, she's one of the owners of Burn Fitness and also Time Republic here in Woodburn. And so I really want to make everyone aware about what's going on and how we don't stand by that and how that's not Woodburn proud, and how maybe we can do as a council just to how we don't agree with those statements, and that's not a representation of who we are as Woodburn. And so I really do wanted to make y'all aware of it, and I appreciate every single one of you for, you know, taking the time to be open, to have conversations with your constituents about things that are going on, and just being aware of it. So I appreciate it, and thank you so much.
I penned a guest opinion that'll appear tomorrow in the Woodburn Independent, and it was like all of you just wrote it. So I must have been channeling all of you as I was writing it about that. I'll just end with two quick things. I think we talked about reaching out and just being there for people. And at the beginning of this crisis, I know John Zobrist, who's still on, can relate to, we talked to so many people and so many businesses, and they were like anxious, but like, okay, maybe we'll make it through. Like they weren't really sure what was coming, but there was an anxiousness there. As the weeks wore on, a story that I had just from a couple days ago in a local restaurant, happy that it was open, happy that I was saying hello, but turned her computer screen to me and said, "Well, here's my rent bill. It's up to like $1,700, and here's my light bill, and here's my water bill." So there's real worry out there now, and so I can't just be more heartfelt thanks to that we're really stepping up in that area, really meeting that need. And on a happy note, on Saturday at 1 o'clock, Councilor Schwab and I hopefully will be riding in a very cool sports car in a parade that Country Meadows is organizing with a local car club that's going through the assisted livings and through senior estates. And so you're all welcome to participate in that. I think they're just finalizing details and getting out there. So it's a car club, and I don't know if they have cool car, like lots of cool cars for us to ride in, but you can talk to me about that later. So the one I'm hoping will pick out that I've told Councilor Schwab about is like it's a long, sleek convertible, like a 57 something, that's as Woodburn blue as can be. So we'll see how that works. So. All right, with that, this has been, I'm just thankful for all of you and the kind of city that we are and that we represent. So with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Have a nice evening.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Hard, exhausting.
Oh, this will,
That was a lot of emotions in one meeting.
this meeting will go down
So are we still
in
on?
memory.
You're off.
Okay. So what did she talk about, Lindsay? I didn't understand.
So